It started as a soft thud, barely audible over the hum of my laptop. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just the house settling. That's what old houses do, right? Creak and groan like they're alive. But by 2 a.m., it had turned into a relentless banging on my front door, and I was completely alone. I had moved into this little house a month ago, excited to have my own space after years of cramped apartments and shared bathrooms. It was on a quiet street lined with aging oak trees and lampposts that barely worked. My 2 roommates, Alyssa and Jess, were more like sisters than friends. We pooled our savings to rent the place, even though it needed a lot of TLC. This weekend, they'd both gone on a road trip, leaving me with the rare luxury of having the house to myself. Or so I thought. I spent the evening binge watching old horror movies, the irony of which didn't hit me until later. By midnight, I was curled up on the couch, halfway through a bag of chips, when I heard it. A dull, muffled thud from the front door. My heart skipped, but I shook it off. Probably the wind, I told myself. The weather app had mentioned gusts tonight. I turned up the volume and tried to focus on the movie. The thudding came again, louder this time. My stomach twisted into a knot. I paused the movie, the silence in the house suddenly deafening. Slowly, I got up and walked toward the front door. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty porch and the faint glow of the lamppost across the street. "Get a grip, Emma," I whispered to myself. "You're letting the movies mess with your head." I locked the door twice and headed back to the couch. But the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I grabbed my phone and texted Alyssa. "Hey, weird question. Did we ever have issues with the front door making noises?" Alyssa didn't reply. She was probably asleep somewhere on the road. I sighed and scrolled through my feed, hoping to distract myself. Another bang. This one wasn't muffled. It was sharp, deliberate. My blood ran cold. My fingers tightened around my phone as I crept back to the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The peephole revealed nothing but darkness. I flipped on the porch light, but it only illuminated the empty space where the sound had come from. Just as I was about to step away, I heard it again, a faint whisper, low and almost unintelligible, like someone was speaking just out of earshot. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. This wasn't normal. I backed away from the door and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked, her tone calm and detached. "Someone's outside my house," I blurted. "They keep banging on the door and I think they're whispering." "Are you alone in the house?" "Yes," I whispered, as if the person outside might hear me. "Please send someone quickly." She assured me that officers were on their way. I stayed on the line, crouched in the hallway with every light in the house turned off. Minutes felt like hours. The banging continued, sporadic now, but each thud made me flinch. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent chills down my spine. It wasn't friendly, it felt malicious. Finally, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Relief washed over me as 2 officers stepped onto the porch. I opened the door just enough to let them in, my hands shaking. "Did you see anyone?" one of them asked, his flashlight cutting through the shadows outside. I shook my head. "No, just the noises." The officers checked the perimeter of the house. They found nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. But as they were about to leave, one of them stopped and shined his flashlight upward. "What's that?" he muttered. I followed his gaze to the attic vent. The slats were slightly ajar, and something metallic glinted in the light. "Stay here," the officer instructed. He and his partner went upstairs, guns drawn. I stayed frozen in the hallway, clutching my phone like a lifeline. A few minutes later, I heard a commotion. Heavy footsteps, muffled voices, and then silence. When the officers came back down, their faces were grim. "Ma'am, it looks like someone's been living in your attic," one of them said. My stomach dropped. What? How? There's a small crawl space up there, accessible from the backyard. Looks like they've been sneaking in and out for a while. But who? Why? My voice cracked. The officer shook his head. "We don't know yet, but we found some items, personal belongings. Looks like they've been keeping tabs on you and your roommates." I felt sick. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor. They stayed with me until a locksmith arrived to change all the locks and secure the attic. But even after they left, the sense of violation lingered. My home, my sanctuary, had been invaded by someone I didn't know. Someone who had been watching me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch with every light on, flinching at every creak and shadow. The house no longer felt like mine, it felt like his. The police never caught the person. Weeks passed, and I moved out as soon as I could, but the fear stayed with me. Every noise, every whisper of wind made my heart race. I started sleeping with a chair jammed under the door handle, even in my new place. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, looking for another attic to call home, another life to invade. And every time I hear a sound in the middle of the night, I can't help but wonder, is it the house settling, or is it him? Home is supposed to be where you feel safe. But for me, it became a place of terror, a constant reminder that safety is an illusion. Always check the attic. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone eating in my kitchen, but I was all alone. It had been a long week. Midterms had drained every ounce of energy I had, and when my roommates announced they were heading out of town for a weekend getaway, I was secretly thrilled. A weekend alone in the apartment sounded like a dream, quiet, uninterrupted sleep, and a chance to recharge. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I spent Friday binge watching my favorite horror series, irony not lost on me, and Saturday cleaning the apartment while blasting music. By Sunday night, the novelty of being alone had worn off. The quiet that I had once craved started to feel oppressive. I double-checked the locks before heading to bed, a habit I never had when my roommates were home. The clock read 2:13 a.m. when I stirred awake. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. My room was bathed in the faint glow of the street lamp outside, and everything seemed normal. But then I heard it, the faint clinking of dishes and the unmistakable sound of someone or something chewing. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. My first rational thought was that maybe one of my roommates had come back early, but I knew that wasn't right. I had locked the door after all, and they would have told me if they were coming back. I strained to listen, praying I had imagined it. Then I heard it again. The sound was deliberate, the way someone might eat when they think no one's watching, slow, casual bites, followed by the scrape of a fork against a plate. I swallowed hard and swung my legs over the bed. My feet hit the cold floor, and I reached for my phone, clutching it like a lifeline. My mind raced with explanations. Was it a neighbor's noise echoing through the walls? A stray animal somehow trapped inside? Every possibility seemed more absurd than the last. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, telling myself I needed to investigate, if only to prove my paranoia wrong. As I stepped out of my room, the air in the apartment felt different. Heavy, like someone else's presence lingered. The hallway stretched before me, darker than usual. I crept toward the kitchen, the sounds growing louder with each step. My breath hitched when I reached the corner that led to the kitchen. The clinking stopped abruptly. Dead silence. For a moment, I considered running back to my room and locking the door, but curiosity and adrenaline pushed me forward. Slowly, I peered around the corner. What I saw sent a jolt of terror through my body. There, sitting at the kitchen table, was a figure. They were hunched over, a slice of pizza in one hand. The overhead light illuminated the scene just enough for me to see their face was obscured by a hood. My leftover pizza box was open on the table, crumbs scattered across the surface. They didn't seem to notice me yet, entirely engrossed in their midnight snack. I let out an involuntary gasp, and their heads snapped up. For a split second, we locked eyes. I'll never forget those eyes, wild, unblinking, and filled with something I can only describe as desperation. I screamed, loud and guttural, the kind of scream that comes from pure primal fear. The figure bolted from the chair, knocking it over with a deafening clatter. They darted toward the back door, flinging it open before disappearing into the night. I stood there, trembling, my flashlight shaking in my hand. It took me several minutes to regain enough composure to call the police. When they arrived, I was still sitting on the kitchen floor, hugging my knees to my chest. My voice wavered as I recounted what had happened. The officers searched the apartment, reassuring me that the intruder was gone, but their faces told me they weren't sure how the person had gotten in. One of the officers stayed with me while the other inspected the property. He returned about an hour later, his expression grim. "We found something," he said. "They led me to a small closet in the hallway." The officer pointed to the ceiling, where a square panel, the entrance to the crawl space, was slightly ajar. I felt my stomach drop. "Someone's been living up there," he said, his tone apologetic. I stared at the panel, my mind reeling. The officer explained that they found signs of habitation, a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and even some of my belongings that had gone missing over the past few weeks. The realization hit me like a freight train. This person had been living above me the entire time, coming down only when they thought I was asleep. The police couldn't find any clues about who the intruder was or how long they'd been there. They assured me that the locks would be changed immediately and advised me to stay elsewhere for a while. But reassurance felt hollow. The knowledge that someone had been watching me, moving through my space while I slept, left a scar deeper than I could have imagined. Aftermath. I moved out of that apartment a month later. My roommates were supportive, but I could tell they felt guilty for leaving me alone that weekend. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without checking every closet, every crawl space, every shadow in my home. Even now, years later, I'll catch myself glancing at ceilings, half expecting to see a panel slightly ajar. The fear never truly leaves you. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the creaks of an old house or the rustle of leaves outside your window. It makes you question the sanctity of your home, the one place you're supposed to feel safe. But the worst part isn't the fear. It's the violation. Knowing that someone invaded your world, stole your peace, and left behind an invisible scar. That's what haunts me the most. I answered the phone, but it was a voice I knew all too well, someone I thought I'd never hear from again. The rain lashed against the windows that night, the wind howling through the trees like a warning. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, nursing a cup of chamomile tea. It had been a long day, work deadlines, errands, the usual grind that kept me too busy to think about much else. My little house, though modest, was my sanctuary. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the old floorboards, and the soft ticking of the wall clock made it feel alive in a comforting way. It had been 2 years since my mother passed. She'd been my rock, my confidant, my guiding light through every storm. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself, and though time had dulled the sharp edge of grief, it still lingered like a faint bruise you forget about until it's pressed. That night, the phone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet, slicing through the patter of rain. I glanced at the clock. 11:37 p.m. A late-night call wasn't unusual for work emergencies, but something about it made my stomach tighten. I set my mug down and reached for my phone, the screen glowing with an unknown number. My thumb hovered over the answer button. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to pick up. "Hello?" I said, my voice tentative. There was a brief crackle of static, and then I heard a voice I knew so well it felt like my own heartbeat. "It's me, sweetheart." My breath caught. "Mom, I'm still here," she said, her tone soft and soothing, just as I remembered. I froze, my mind racing. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. My mother had died in her sleep, peacefully, or so I'd been told. But the voice was unmistakable, carrying the same inflections, the same warmth. "Mom," I repeated, my voice breaking. How is this?" "Don't be scared," she said, her voice crackling slightly, as though the connection was bad. "I just needed to let you know that I'm still here, watching over you." A lump formed in my throat. Tears welled in my eyes as I clutched the phone tighter. "I've missed you so much," I whispered. "I know, sweetheart. I've missed you too." For a fleeting moment, it felt like a miracle, a second chance. I didn't question it. I didn't care how or why. I just wanted to hold onto that voice, to let it fill the void I'd been carrying since she left. But then something shifted. The tone of her voice changed, growing colder. "You should be careful," she said. "You're not as safe as you think." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" Her laughter was hollow, unnatural. "You've been so naive, haven't you? Thinking everything was fine, that you could just move on." "Mom?" I stammered, my pulse quickening. "Why are you saying this?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she began to speak about things only my mother could know. The lullaby she used to sing when I was scared, the way she'd braid my hair before school, the pet name she had for me that no one else used. But the details grew darker, the arguments we'd had, the secrets I'd confided in her, the regrets I'd buried deep. Her words felt like a scalpel, cutting through the thin scar tissue of my grief. "Stop it," I yelled, tears streaming down my face. "Who are you? What is this?" The line crackled with static, and then her voice returned, distorted and menacing. "You think you can hide from the truth? It's time you knew what really happened." I hung up, my hands trembling. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath. It felt like the walls were closing in, the air thick with something unseen and oppressive. The phone rang again, the same number flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned it off and threw it onto the couch, as though distance could sever the connection. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat in the corner of my living room, every creak of the house making me jump. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, her words twisting and looping like a sinister refrain. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a cruel prank, someone mimicking her voice, but deep down, I wasn't sure. The next day, I started digging. I pulled out old photo albums, letters, anything that might offer a clue. I combed through her belongings, which I'd kept boxed up in the attic, looking for answers. That's when I found it, a police report I'd never seen before, buried beneath stacks of faded papers. My hands shook as I read it. My mother's death hadn't been as peaceful as I'd been led to believe. The report detailed signs of foul play, bruises, signs of a struggle. But the case had been closed, ruled an accident due to insufficient evidence. A cold dread settled over me. Why had no one told me? Why had this been hidden? And why now, after all this time, was her voice reaching out to me? The phone calls didn't stop. Even after I changed my number, they came. Sometimes it was her voice, pleading and sorrowful. Other times it was filled with rage, accusing me of things I didn't understand. One night, I decided to answer again. My voice wavered as I said, "What do you want from me?" The line was silent for a moment, and then she said, "Find him." "Find who?" I asked, desperation clawing at my chest. "You know who," she replied, her voice breaking. "He's still out there, and he's watching you." My blood ran cold. I tried to ask more, but the line went dead. That was the last time I heard from her. Fueled by fear and a need for answers, I delved deeper into her past, piecing together fragments of her life that I'd never fully understood. I discovered that my mother had been in a tumultuous relationship before I was born, one she'd kept hidden from everyone. The man she'd been involved with had a history of violence, a trail of restraining orders and whispered warnings, and he'd never been caught. The realization hit me like a freight train. Her voice, the phone calls, the messages, they weren't just hauntings, they were warnings, a plea for justice from beyond the grave. I went to the police with what I'd found, but the trail was cold. No new leads, no evidence. The man had vanished years ago, leaving nothing but a ghost story in his wake. But I knew he was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. That the phone might ring again, bringing her voice back to me, pulling me deeper into the darkness she'd tried to protect me from. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear the faint hum of static in the air, like the echo of a distant call. And I wonder, was it really her, or was it something else entirely? Something far more sinister? The answer, I fear, is one I'll carry with me to my own grave.